Porsche nerds will immediately point out the difference between the 991.1 and the 991.2 GT3 RS, from its rose-jointed suspension mounts to the better aero. The one detail that most don't talk about, however, is the calibration for the rear-wheel steering system and what that means when setting up these cars for track use. In this video, I'll explain how the rear-wheel steering system elongates the wheelbase virtually and what setup changes I made to my own car to maximize drivability and performance with this in mind. Hi, I'm Bear. I hold a German motorsport license, people pay me to set up their cars every now and then, and the guy who taught me to drive has more Nürburgring laps than most people have warm meals. You're watching The Chassis Code. This is Deconstructed, a format turning first-hand knowledge into actionable insights. To start off, it'll be best to quickly recap what the rear-wheel steering system actually does and how it simulates a longer wheelbase at speed. Every car, when it is turning, is rotating around some geometric point. This point is called the instantaneous center of rotation. Think of it as the center of gravity, but not for the point where the car's mass center is, but as the point around which the car pivots when you steer. On a conventional car with fixed rear wheels, that pivot point will be somewhere along the rear axle, as this graph demonstrates. Here, the point labeled X is the rotation center. Now, every time the car turns, this X is the pivot point, kinda how a door would pivot around its hinges. If the rear wheels can turn, say in the same direction as the front wheels by even 1 degree, this geometric point is now moved further away from the car, and we label this point Y. If we now show the same car with a longer wheelbase, we find that its instantaneous center of rotation is also further outward, similar to the car with the rear wheel steering. Hence, both the longer wheelbase car and the car with the rear wheel steering push the instantaneous center of rotation further outwards, which is why we say that rear wheel steering systems simulate a longer wheelbase. And a longer wheelbase provides more stability, generally speaking. Another point to consider with the rear wheel steering systems is, and this is often neglected, how the loaded side of the rear axle in a corner effectively gets more toe in than the static alignment would suggest. Toe in can be useful as it provides stability, but because the car constantly adjusts the angle of the rear wheels mid-corner depending on your steering input, your pedal input, and various sensors measuring the dynamics of the car, this active rear axle can sometimes do unwanted things. Case in point, the 991.1 GT3 RS can feel somewhat unstable at the Tiergarten and Hohenrhein sections at the Nürburgring, especially before the resurfacing, because you are turning at the same time a compression starts. The rear wheel turns with the front wheels for stability, effectively creating toe in at the outside wheel when it would immediately get hit by a compression. It's a double whammy and can make the car feel more bum steery and nervous. This is made worse if the car had a lot of static toe in to begin with as part of its alignment. On the 991.2 GT3 RS, this problem was largely solved as the rear wheel steering system algorithm would now read and understand the driver inputs better, resulting in a more nuanced movement and a more stable rear axle, despite the higher spring rates. So the calibration of the system changed on the 991.2 for the better. So if your 991 GT3 RS had a twitchy rear axle and never wanted to settle, especially with continuous steering input, now you know the likely reason. To fix it, simply decrease the rear static toe in. On my 991.2 GT3 RS, I ran zero toe front and rear, and it worked well for Touristenfahrten traffic, where you generally want a more forgiving setup. Some 997 owners made the mistake of using the same static toe in on the rear axle with their newer 991 models, which made their 991s not very nice to drive. This is the point where you can clearly see how 997s and 991s cannot be set up the same way, as the technology, that is the rear wheel steering system, means setups don't translate between generations anymore. If you have questions or have something to add, let me know in the comments and I'll reply to each and every one of you. This has been The Chassis Code. God be with you, and until next time.